Welcome back, everyone, to That Amazon Ads podcast, where today we are finally getting round to a highly contested topic, one that has been a question that we get all the time, which is, should I negate harvested keywords when I'm harvesting out search terms from my research-based campaigns into my performance-based campaigns, taking things from auto campaigns into exact? Should I be negating those keywords from the source? Our answer is always, it depends for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of pros and cons to both sides. One might be right, one they might not be right. We're here to find out, and we're joined by Andrew, Carly, and Mina. And why don't we give Carly and Mina, we'll start with Carly. Just why don't you give people a quick introduction? You've both been on the podcast before, but in case if people missed your episode, what's a 30-second introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, all right. So I'm Carly McMillan. I'm the co-founder of an Amazon ads agency called PPC Farm. We started the agency after over a decade of experience selling on Amazon ourselves. And with 11 brands and thousands of SKUs, we kind of needed to figure out PPC. So with a lot of trial and error, we were able to kind of, optimize and really figure it out. And now we're able to offer that expertise to other sellers. And we're actually so confident that we can improve your ads that we offer a 60-day free trial to all new clients. So, yeah.
Awesome. Very nice. Thank you, Carly, for that introduction. Mina, tell us a little bit about you.
Love it. My name is Mina, Elias, founder of Trivium, which is a full-service Amazon agency. I started similar to Carly with my own brand back in 2018. MMA Nutrition is a supplement brand. Grew it, scaled it. There was a lot of demand for me to help other people. So I ended up starting Trivium, and we grew from about one employee to 86, 87 now, and 185, 186 brands under management. So I've seen kind of like everything under the sun, I feel, when it comes to PPC, and that's where I started. I started off as PPC before turning into full service. So I've tested a lot of hypotheses out. I'm very excited to hear what Carly has to say and why she thinks, negating and all this, whatever her opinion is, right? I'm not going to burn it for the listeners. But I've tested a lot of things out. I'm excited. I'm always learning. I'm always, excited to hear other people's perspectives on stuff.
Yeah, and Mina loves an argument. He loves a fight. He's back for his second PPC debate. So
that's right.
It's good to have him.
Former MMA, competitive MMA, right, Mina?
Ooh.
Yeah.
See,
I still train. I still train every day.
There you go. Yeah, and we're doing things a little bit different because normally on these debates, we have some guests on and they just go back and forth, and Andrew and I refrain from our own opinions. This time, we are not refraining. We are diving in, and we are actually taking sides. And we've got Andrew and Carly teaming up on being proponents of the strategy that you should negate those harvested terms as you harvest them out. And Mina and myself will be defending the view that you should not, and that it's actually better for you to not negate those terms. So with that, let us dive in.
Round one.
All right, so I'll kick things off. As Steven said, my stance is that yes, you absolutely should be negating any search terms from your source campaigns, or what we call farming campaigns. Some people call them keyword discovery campaigns. And my main opinion or argument is that by doing this, you're going to be able to have much more precise bids and therefore more efficient ad spend. And I also know that one of the main arguments on the other side that, the reason people are kind of afraid to negate from source campaigns is because they're worried that they're not going to get the same level of performance in an exact campaign versus a broad or an auto campaign. But I did a little experiment. It is little. It was only 9 days before and 9 days after, so small. But I'm able to show that that's not really the case. And you don't need to be afraid of negating terms because you'll be missing out on performance or having worse performance once you move something over to an exact. And oftentimes you'll find that you're going to be getting even better performance, again, because you're able to adjust the bid much more precisely. And I'll explain more what I mean by precisely.
Awesome. And now we're going to pass it over to Mina to kick off the other side.
Cool. So I'm on the side of you should not negate anything that's working. And this is ultimately it comes from anecdotal evidence. So I basically would turn on an auto campaign, turn on some, broad campaigns as we all do, right, to discover keywords. And then a certain keyword would start performing well. Great. And now I'm like, okay, I want to double down on that keyword, so I'm going to launch it in its own campaign. So let's say the keyword was electrolyte powder. It was discovered in auto, or let's say it was discovered in broad, like electrolyte, hydration powder, for example, just to make it a little bit more long tail. It was discovered in auto or broad, and then I want to launch it in its own campaign in exact. So I do that. Now, I've tried where I would launch it and then I would pause the keyword. And so I would look at that keyword in broad and it was generating, for example, $100 in sales. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm gonna pause that keyword or negate that keyword, and no longer get those $100 in sales, so that I can get more out of the exact one. And what would happen is then I don't get $100. It starts performing worse, or I do get the $100, but the ACOS is much higher. And so I started, initially that's what I learned. I learned you should negate. It's called graduating keywords, right? Where you kind of add the negative and then, launch it as its own campaign. And then I'm like, okay, every time I do that, I feel like I just shot myself in the foot, because I was making money and now I'm no longer making money once I launched those keywords. So I said, I'm going to stop doing that. And I'm if it's working, I'm going to let it be. And then I'm going to launch it in its own campaign as well. Now, the idea that keywords compete was the biggest thing. It's like, well, if you have it in broad, you would negate it as a search term, so it does not compete with your exact keyword. But then if you think a little bit further about it and you start like even counting the impressions, is if it's in broad for a certain, so if I have electrolyte powder and electrolyte supplement or electrolyte hydration powder is the search term in broad, if I look at that keyword in the search term report, it's amongst 50 other keywords. Or if it's in auto, it's amongst hundreds of other keywords. And so how much percent of the time is that keyword getting budget, from that auto or broad campaign? And so if you compare that with the exact campaign, which that one keyword should be getting 100% of the budget all the time, are they actually competing? Why would they compete if you are spending $2 or $3 or $5 or $10 a day on that broad, but you have $100 daily budget on the exact one? Why would there be any competition? So again, anecdotally, right? And it's just I stopped doing that pausing and negating and graduating, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm just gonna launch it in its own campaign, and I'm gonna launch it in multiple match types, so broad, phrase, and exact, because I'm just trying. So my mentality is just try and stack the wins and on Amazon. So it's like test a bunch of different keywords out, trying to like logically make it work. Wasn't working for me. So I'm like, if I just throw a bunch of different like baits in the water, sort of, or lines in the water, and whatever works, perfect, keep it, double it down, and if it doesn't work, then stop spending money on it. That's kind of what's worked more for me than like trying to kind of manufacture the way that the ad spend is going, because that just wasn't working. And again, I would love to hear more of Carly, of like what happened when you did it, and when you didn't negate it, like what did you see as the downside of that?
Cool. And so I'll jump in now and share my opinion here and my stance on things. Everybody get our opinions out there, and then we'll dig into the details. But to say something different than Carly, I definitely agree with what she said around harvesting in order to isolate that spend. And that just creates a lot of data cleanliness, and like where exactly your spend is going. You don't have to pull a bunch of reports and aggregate the data in order to see how much you spent on one search term, because it's spread across 7 different campaigns, and each of them is only getting a little bit of budget here and there. So that's one piece, is just isolating that spend into one area where it's very easy to see and track and measure and make adjustments, and that's a lot more fine-tuned and specific to keyword and product pairing. And then another point of view that I have is around just the overall number of placements on a search. You can only have 1 or at most 2 on any given search. And so I don't think it really matters whether you negate or not if you're harvesting. And we usually see that you get better performance. You're more isolated, more specific, so you get better conversion rates on exact match, because you know exactly what you're bidding on and what you're going after. And so if you're only able to win 1 placement, or maybe 2 placements, if you're targeting that same keyword at least 1 other place or 2 other places, you're already going to be maximizing the placements on that search. And so, having it available in an auto campaign or a broad campaign or something like that is almost not doesn't matter too much, because all of that spend is going to be isolated to where you're bidding the most aggressive, and that's likely going to be in your exact match campaign.
All right, now my turn to set everyone straight here. Just kidding. A lot of what's been said, I already agree with. But for me, the biggest reason is that when you are adjusting bids for different targets, most of the time, you're going to be looking at the total sales or orders or the conversion rate or the ACOS of those targets. That's going to inform whether you should be increasing a bid or decreasing a bid, etc. So my problem is that if you have an auto campaign, or let's just say you got a broad match keyword that is doing extraordinarily well, and by all regards, like the ACOS is really low, it's getting 20% ACOS, you should be getting up to 30% ACOS, and you got a lot of room to increase there. Well, if you just negated 100% of all the terms that were driving orders, that target is now only spending on everything else that didn't drive an order. And not only that, but your bidding system is going to be increasing the bids against everything else that did not convert. So you will very likely see a spend spike with 0 orders to show for it. And fortunately, nobody on this podcast is using any form of automation. To my understanding, Carly and Mina are both large proponents of managing bids manually, as are Andrew and I. Obviously, we use adlabs, but even in those manual adjustments, you're often going to be trying to make some kind of calculations based off of that. So yes, if you're doing things manually, you can say, okay, I just harvested from these yesterday, so therefore I don't want to increase the bids here. You can do stuff like that, but even then, I mean, if you're using automated software, I don't know how that's why if everyone's wondering how come the performance is so bad on these automations, it's because they're looking at a last 30 days rolling window. They're seeing all these targets with really low ACOS, and every single day they're increasing the bids more and more and more and more because it's still low ACOS, even though you negated 100% of everything that was driving any sales and keeping that ACOS low. So that's a large reason why other automated systems do not work. For me, yeah, even within adlabs, we can kind of account for that, and maybe I should say I'm not going to optimize any bids on these auto campaigns, or maybe even reduce all the bids on those auto campaigns by 10 or 20% to account for the fact that I just negated things. But what's going to end up happening as you continue to do that, you're continuously you're going to run into one of two scenarios. Either number one, you're going to always have high ACOS on those research campaigns, and it's just not going to be great. Or number two, you're going to have to repeatedly lower those bids so much to keep a good ACOS that you end up stopping all research altogether, because now you've got 10-cent bids, which isn't enough to get you any traffic. And I've spoke with Andrew about this, so I already know some of what he's going to say to that. But with that, let's switch over to round 2, which is just going to be a free-for-all madness and everyone just talking at the same time. So let's dive into that.
Round 2.
Okay, so I want to go back to basics a little bit and just kind of explain a few key things here that I think might get a little bit confusing if you're not in the weeds like all of us are, I think, every day. So the first thing is, like, what are negative keywords, right? So basically it's a way to tell Amazon, hey, I don't want my ad to display on this term, right? On this keyword. That's pretty much it, right? And so we typically use negative keywords in 2 main ways. So the first way is if we deem that term is irrelevant to the ASIN in some way. We actually have an AI system that helps us to determine the relevancy of a keyword, and we assign it a disposition, and then based on that disposition, give it a certain number of clicks before we kill it or negate it if it has no sales. But that's not really what we're talking about today. We're talking about the second way, which is once something is converted, then in a discovery campaign or a source campaign, then we negate it, right? So that's the first kind of back to basics thing I want to talk about. The second thing is the difference between keywords and customer search terms. So I think these are used interchangeably a lot, but they're actually quite different. And I think that it's an important distinction because I, for one, am not a proponent of negating keywords, only customer search terms, right? So the difference, really, the way I think about it anyway, is keywords come from you. They come from the advertiser, right? You are guessing. You put those in your campaign sort of as a guess. And then based on the match type, whether it's auto, broad, or phrase, those will match with the customer search term, right? That's what the customer's actually typing in the search bar. We let the customers tell us what they're actually searching for, right? So just to be clear, I am talking specifically about negating customer search terms that have converted, right? Those as a negative exact, or in some cases as a negative phrase, right? If we have identified a single individual word that is, overall bad. So I just want to make that clear because, yeah, we would never pause a keyword necessarily in a campaign, but it's only pause or negate, but just the customer search terms. So that's kind of the first thing I want to talk about, because I think that can get a little confusing. And that also leads into another point I have about why you're not able to adjust bids precisely, but I don't want to take up all the time. So I'm going to pause there in case anybody has anything to fill in.
No, I think that's good, Carly. That was a good explanation of the basics. I think you should go into more of your point.
Okay.
Because then now we don't have anything to talk about.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you wanted to be actually.
No, that was good. That was a good explanation of the basics, because I think, people might be confused. Like, we're strictly talking in this topic about search terms only, because that's like the whole process of the graduation, negation, harvesting, whatever. It's like when you discover a keyword in a campaign and you want to move it to its own campaign so it performs better.
Yep, exactly. Thank you. So,
hey, wait.
Okay. Yeah.
Can really quickly, just to also provide some clarification, what's like let's not debate this topic, but just because I'm curious, what's everyone's typical criteria? Like, what are the filters you're looking for to harvest? And let's just everyone share.
Yeah, I can share quick. So for me, for mature, sort of product, it is usually 1 to 25% ACOS, depending on how aggressive the person wants to be, and like 2 sales or more, in a search term. When it's in the launch phase, I'm way more aggressive. So maybe it's anywhere between 1 to 40 or 45% ACOS, and 2 sales or more in the search term report.
Cool. Perfect.
So mine's easy. 1 conversion, and we'll harvest it. Essentially, we want as many shots on goal as we can. And so because actually we do use automation in our performance campaigns, and not in our farming campaigns typically, but we basically believe that if a search term has converted, it's probably a good term for that ASIN. And it's going to generally be the 80-20 rule, right? You're not going to get maximum performance out of every single keyword that converted in a source or keyword discovery campaign, but you want to give it a shot, right? I mean, you just spent money to acquire that keyword. You might as well use it, right? And so sometimes you get kind of not great keywords and they only convert like 10 times a year. That's fine. If you get enough of those, you can have this kind of big portfolio of quality keywords that give you kind of that overall good performance.
What if the ACOS is like very high? Like it did convert once in the search term report, but it was like 90 to 100%.
So typically we don't usually see that, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Like
That's crazy.
Yeah, we'll take it.
So even if it converts at a high ACOS, you'll still take it, and you'll just give it a second shot on its own.
Yep, exactly. We kind of give it another chance. We give it another chance in the exact to see how it's going to perform with more precise bidding.
Well, I think you also.
And do you think? Go ahead. Sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, you actually become more precise with the bidding whenever you do harvest that high ACOS target, because if you just leave it in that auto campaign, you're not able to control the bids on that specific search term. It's going to change all the the bids across all those search terms. So you harvest it so you can get a little more precise, and you can down bid that specific keyword and let your auto campaign keep going out there and finding good stuff.
Yeah, Andrew, what's your harvesting criteria?
Yeah. Generally speaking, it's going to be greater than 1 order. And then I also will sometimes do like a volume check, like see how much search volume this actually gets, see if we need to harvest it or not. But yeah, that's usually what it is.
Yeah. And for myself, I'm with Andrew. I'm usually looking, you need at least 1 order, obviously. But for my volume check, I'll do what Mina does, which is at least 2 orders. That'll show me that's pretty good volume. Or if I'm trying to be a bit more aggressive and for smaller accounts with lower volume, I'll do at least 1 order and then at least something like 10 clicks. Just to make sure. I don't want to harvest a ton of 1-click, 1-order scenarios, because those could be search terms that are never going to be searched again. And I don't want to over harvest and inundate all my campaigns with a surplus of low volume keywords. But then I will also side with Andrew, where we will absolutely harvest keywords with high ACOS, because if you got a keyword with 60% ACOS but a lot of sales volume, you don't just negate it. You would just adjust the bid to pull that ACOS down. And we look at the same thing with harvesting search terms. If you're harvesting something with a 60% ACOS, it's still a sale. Sometimes the CPC is just too high relative to that search term's conversion rate. And fun fact, in AdLabs, coming out next week, will be our harvesting tool in which you can tap into the AdLabs bidding algorithm to calculate the bids for all those high ACOS search terms. So that when you plug them into your destination campaigns, the bids will be properly calculated and calibrated, also taking into account the placement settings for those destination campaigns. So fun fact pitch there. And yeah.
All right. That's your last pitch for this podcast, Steve.
All right.
Now, I'm kidding.
It's his
I think the
podcast.
problem. Yeah, I know. I think the problem with that that I'm seeing is it sounds great. Like I personally would do it. I would take any search term and then test it, right? But I have way more budget than like most clients. So most of our clients is like we need precise targeting. So if it did not convert well, because there is a relationship between a keyword and the conversion rate, right? And so there's certain keywords where the conversion rate is better there because like the source of the audience coming in, like that's why the search query performance report is so valuable. It's because it walks you through that whole journey of this is the search term, or the keyword, this is how many impressions it got, and this is how it converted. And when you look at your conversion rate overall as like a product, it is just the sum of all of those keywords. And so when you're looking at a search term and you have a broad campaign and it has two search terms, one that converted at a 35% ACOS, the other one that converted at a 90% ACOS, it just tells you that the audience coming from that search term, the intention behind it, and obviously it's way more complex because they probably searched 4, 5, 6 different keywords, but it just kind of gives you a brief kind of insight into like the audience coming through that search term is more likely to convert. And so if for me, Mina, I do electrolyte powder, that conversion rate might be 10%. But if I do unflavored electrolyte powder, because one of my products is unflavored, the conversion rate might be 45%. And so that's why I think with a lot of clients, it's hard to just say, cool, any ACOS in the search term report, doesn't matter if it converted even once, I'm going to give it a shot and I'm going to adjust the bid. Because I do understand that the goal behind it is to, okay, it converted at an 80% ACOS. If I want to get it down to like 35, it was in position 17. If I lower the bid and get it to position like 24, 25, 26, CPC will be lower. Intent should be hypothetically higher. But then my downside, my risk here is I have to test that. And then I could just test it to reach the conclusion again that audience just wasn't, good enough or warm enough to convert on that keyword. And so how do you guys think about that? When it comes to like, well, I just don't want to waste money testing to see if the hypothesis is true or not.
I guess for me, I mean, you are going to be testing, especially if you're not negating in your source campaigns, then you're testing it in your source campaign still, right? If you're leaving it in there and not negating it, right? If you're leaving it in there with the bad ACOS, to me, it's better to harvest it out and put it into an exact campaign where you are able to sort of see what kind of performance it's going to have, right? Because the other thing is, if a term has a bad ACOS in a source campaign, then that might only be from a few clicks, right? We might not really have enough data to actually see, is this a good term or is this a bad term, right? So for me, I agree with Andrew that the best thing is to give it a chance, and you don't want to leave money on the table. And again, like I said, not like those might not be your big best, big winning terms, but as a sort of portfolio of terms, you can eventually, you don't want to miss out on that money, basically.
Yeah. And from my perspective, Mina, you mentioned something about like taking electrolyte powder, you got like a good ACOS on it in your auto campaign, and then you graduated it up to exact, and then you're like, performance isn't as good once I harvested it, so this must not be a good keyword, or shouldn't have done that. I should have just left it where it was. And to add into this conversation, not only is it like your conversion rates and their intent is going to be different based on, what searches you're showing up on, but also just where on the page you're showing up, like what placements, all that type of stuff. Different placements have varying conversion rates and things like that. So inside that auto campaign, we can't really say or know for sure, like where that spend went. Was it all on product pages? Was it in lower, rest of search? And that's why we ended up getting a really cheap click and a one sale. But then when we move it to exact, we're bidding a little bit more aggressive. We're getting more exposure. We're actually seeing the true performance of this keyword. But then we're also able to optimize around those placements and see like, okay, yeah, it's getting a bad performance on product pages, but like when we push and we're bidding more aggressive, we can actually get higher conversion rates at top and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of what happens sometimes is like if you ever harvest and you're getting bad performance, it's like you might have got a really cheap CPC, a little algorithmic sale, like end of the day, budgets ran out, you were the last person bidding, and that auto campaign went in there and won that 13-cent sale. So I think that you still are going to get those. You're still going to get those sales in exact. I don't think you're going to lose them. It's just you're going to have to tailor how you're bidding to the actual performance of that keyword once you've gotten a truer sense of it.
No, I think you're gonna lose it, because I think if you optimize, right, you now have spent a bunch of money. If we look at it from like a complete perspective, right, you have this search term, it is spending money, and with a little bit of money, and it's making more money than it's spending, and it's great. And then now you're like, okay, I'm gonna try and force it to perform the way I want it to perform, and then you adjust the bid, and you lower the bid, and you increase the bid, and you do all of these things, and now you have spent money trying to do it. You have not been successful, which is the case. Obviously, you can't tell me that every single keyword that you've harvested has been, or search term that you've harvested has performed. And so now you've spent the money, and at the same time, it did not have a good outcome. And at the same time, you also lost that money that you had previously. You know what I mean? So that's why I am against it, is because, yes, ideally, I can extract the search term, put it into that placement that I want it to be. And wouldn't you say that there is nothing wrong with having both at the same time? Because if, like, what is the issue with having both? Because yes, I'm going to harvest that search term, I'm going to put it in an exact campaign, and I'm going to keep optimizing until I have that perfect placement with, the perfect position, all that stuff, and I'm making as much money as possible out of that search term. But why take it out of that one? Do you think it's going to compete? Do you think it's going to take away from that one? And if so, like, that's what the only reason you guys are negativing is because you think that by leaving it there, it's going to take away from the exact one. And so why do you think that's going to happen?
I would say
trapped him.
I was going to say, no, I had a response, but I was going to let Carly go first.
Go
All right. So first, I don't think that you can compete with yourself. So I'm not worried about the auto campaign, like going out and competing with the bids in my exact campaign. I think the only reason I negate it is just for cleanliness and clarity, and that I know that exactly where that spend's going, and I don't have to do all kinds of reporting and pivoting to figure out, how much I actually spend on a keyword. And so, yeah, I would say I'm not worried about the competition aspect of things.
Well, I'm going to jump in there, Andrew, because let's go back with that electrolyte powder example, because we're also doing, I don't think you knew this, Mina, but we're doing a live case study with a brand scaling their journey of growing this electrolyte brand from no sales to $1 million a year in sales. But that's why I like this example. And let's just say they were doing single product campaigns. They got 5 ASINs. Every single one of those ASINs should be bidding on electrolyte powder as exact match. And so in either case, you're going to have to pivot out those search terms or those keywords to see how electrolyte powder is doing across the board. And so, I mean, you're going to have to do it. And I'm sure in pretty much any brand that has more than one product, which is probably all of the brands that any of us have ever worked with, you're going to be a lot of times having the same keyword for all of the variations. So you're going to have to pivot out anyway. So I will second Mina and say, what's your primary concern of allowing one of those search terms to land in another campaign where it's also potentially getting lower CPCs and than it would be on an exact match?
I'll answer your question with a question. When you're targeting those different keywords across all of those 5 ASINs that you have, do you notice that the performance is different across the child variations on each of those individual keywords?
1000%.
So wouldn't you want to put the best performing one in front of the customer?
Well, I'm going to let Amazon's algorithm do its own thing and determine what's best, because they're going to award me with cheaper CPCs and everything like that. But I want all of them to be going simultaneously because they're all relevant to it.
But only one's ever going to win a search or win a placement because it's the same parent.
Mina, what was that?
Yeah, I wanted to help Steven. Okay, so Andrew, your point was that it's the data cleanliness and the pivoting out. What Steven is doing has to be done. So you're going to initially put all of the you're going to have one parent, right, with all the child variations under that keyword. So Amazon's going to show them for all of them. Then you have to go into the advertised product report, pivot out, and then clean the data and figure out which of the ASINs has the best click-through rate for then to isolate it and say, okay, I'm only going to show the chocolate variation. So what his point is saying is you anyways need to be doing the pivoting. So your data cleanliness sort of aspect, initially, it just kind of goes away because you might as well do it because you're going to have to do it for other shit too, I think is Steven's point.
Yeah. Carly, let's hear what you got.
Yeah, so for me, one, it's not a fear that I'm going to be cannibalizing myself by having it in both places. Again, it's more of being able to precisely adjust the bid within the exact campaign. And when it comes to this whole parent-child ASIN sort of aspect of it is, yes, you might. I actually don't believe that you necessarily need to bid on hydration packet for every single child ASIN. We would only so we always have single ASIN campaigns, and so we're only harvesting a new keyword to an ASIN if it has converted for that specific ASIN. Because just like you said, hydration packet's going to have very different performance for each of those ASINs. We don't really know why. I don't know why it performs well for blueberry but not for strawberry. You know, it just happens sometimes. Probably the way, like you said, Amazon is displaying things. So for me, it's definitely about data cleanliness, but it's also about having that more precise bid. And in my experience, for sure, the source campaigns or keyword discovery campaigns almost always have a worse ACoS overall. And again, it all comes back to not being able to precisely adjust that bid. And I can share more about exactly what I mean by that. It's pretty simple. So basically your bid, let's say you're gonna have a broad campaign or a phrase match, your bid is on the keyword level, right? You're not able to adjust the bid on the search term level. And Andrew touched on this earlier, but that is really the main, hindrance to having the keyword discovery campaigns be ever fully optimized, is because you might be bidding on hydration packet, right? The keyword, but those clicks, you might have 20 clicks, and those 20 clicks are being spread out amongst all those different customer search terms, right? So you kind of have this blanket bid that you're not actually able to control. And so you're really never going to have full optimization or full ad efficiency on a keyword discovery campaign. So for that reason, we don't always run keyword discovery campaigns. I mean, you're going to get to a point where either it's not going to make sense. You're not discovering enough new terms. That's one reason to stop it. Seasonality is one as well, right? Like if it's a Christmas queue, you're going to get very different search volume and terms in July. And then another reason is we actually determine the success of a source or a farming campaign based on the cost per new customer search term acquired. And we calculate that based on the actual gross profit of each individual ASIN, since we have single ASIN campaigns. So if it reaches any of those points, then we'll go ahead and pause the entire campaign if it's simply not working. Because in our mind, the main purpose of these keyword discovery or source campaigns is to get new customer search terms, right? Is to discover keywords, not necessarily to have an optimized campaign. That's what we do with the exacts.
Carly, quick question here. Do you think that the precision of your exact campaign with the harvested search term goes down by keeping the original search term in the auto or broad campaign? And if so, what's the mechanism behind that? Because your ultimate purpose is like the precision, right? So it's like, did you notice that the precision went down when you kept them, and then it went up when you removed negative them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So for us, again, because the goal and the purpose of those farming campaigns is to discover new terms, once we discovered it, it's done its job. We don't need to continue bidding on that customer search term. We've already got it, right? So there's no reason to continue spending money is really the main impetus behind the negating.
But it's profitable. So why stop it? Like worst case scenario, your exact performs well and it gets you 20 sales, and then that the search term in the auto or broad gets you another 1 or 2, and so now you have 22. Like why negate it? Like that's kind of my thought behind it. Is like,
yeah,
why if it ain't broke, don't fix it, sort of thing. It's like if it's not hurting the actual campaign, because I keep both, because I'm like, best case, both of them work amazing. Worst case, that one that I didn't in its own campaign didn't work, and so at least I still have that original one that is doing whatever 2 or 3 sales. And I'm totally with you. The biggest, most annoying thing about a search like the broad and auto is that you can't control the bids for each one, and so you're kind of on this like, hey, I'm gonna do one bid for everyone, and I'm gonna have to keep negating to keep it like clean. But again, that doesn't it doesn't take away from like if something worked and made sales, like keep it. And then there's this other point of like, how the older the campaign is, the better it performs. I feel like there's also this unknown aspect of, like, don't know if you guys have tested this, but like you take a keyword, a main keyword, it's a great keyword, and you're like, I'm gonna move it to its own campaign for some reason, right? And then in the new campaign, it's terrible because in the older campaign, it has way more data and history, and it performs better for even if all the bids and everything's the same. I don't know if you guys experienced this. I experienced it a lot. So there's like obviously some sort of hidden thing in the back, like we don't understand. It's like, well, I don't get it. both campaigns are the exact same. I had a $2 bid here, $2 bid here. What happened? I'm supposed to show up in the same position. Why is it performing better in this older one versus newer one? And maybe there is some sort of this like hidden thing that we don't know of, like, why does a random search term perform really well here, and then when we try and optimize it, it doesn't, or it just doesn't replicate the same performance? So why would I lose even if it's just 2 sales, but like now I lost a 15% ACOS 2 sales and settled for, a 70% ACOS, whatever, even if it's 10 sales, but still kind of let go of those good sales.
Yeah. So I guess I do agree. It's a kind of a black box with the whole, like the age of the campaign and whether or not that affects performance. I think nobody has a great answer for that. I mean, I don't know. I've seen both, right? I've seen it where, and I'll show in my little experiment that I did today, that it doesn't matter if it's a brand new campaign or not. But in my experience working with clients, sometimes weird things like that definitely do happen. And yeah, I don't have a great answer for that, to be honest. But I just want to ask, when for your source campaigns, for your discovery campaigns, is your criteria to turn them off or pause them just when the ACOS is bad, kind of a thing? But if it's still getting sales and still getting profitable sales, you'll kind of leave it on. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I essentially will clean up. So a source campaign, let's call it like an auto. I'll just go in regularly and trim out anything with a bad ACOS, ultimately leaving me with everything that is a good ACOS, which means the campaign is now profitable. So it's like kind of pruning the campaign. But obviously everything that I discover, I'm trying to launch it in their own campaigns to get that precision that you guys are going for, and get obviously I can only pump in so much money in, because it's like randomized where the budget is going, versus like I can put $200, $300 behind the campaign. But yeah, what I do with the source is just keep like trimming them.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we do the same thing. Like you can't just like let it run and never touch it, right? But yeah, we just find that you do get better efficiency when you negate. But yeah, I definitely see what you're saying.
Now, Carly, I think you had some screenshots that you wanted to talk through. So we'll throw these up. We got 3 screenshots. So let us know which one we're supposed to be looking at first. And then I've got a couple of screenshots, and I'll make my point, and then we'll kind of give everyone an opportunity to just like send in their closing thoughts, and then we'll call this episode a conclusive and decisive victory in favor of me and Mina. So
okay. So the first screenshot I want to show is the one called broad negation test screenshot keywords. All right, so in this first screenshot here, so let me just introduce the sort of experiment that I did. So basically, I started a broad campaign just with 2 keywords related to this particular ASIN, which is a grill brick. It's like a brick that you use to clean off your grill. And just for the sake of simplicity, I just did 2 what we call seed keywords in the campaign. Let that run for 9 days, see what happens, and then I paused it and moved any search terms that were discovered into an exact campaign, ran that for 9 days, and then we can kind of compare and contrast. Okay, so in this first screenshot here, you're looking at the keywords that I used. So we've got grill brick and grill block, and you can see, total ACOS for these 9 days was 22%. Looks pretty good. 53 clicks on grill brick. Okay, but as we know, this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't really tell the full story. We need to go look at the search terms. So now if we go look at the search terms that we sort of discovered or came through in the campaign, I'm just kind of focusing on these main 4 that actually had any activity. So these first 2 here, you can see, so typically we would actually negate it before it had 8 orders. Yeah, so typically like grill bricks for cleaning flat top, we would have, or grill cleaning brick, we would have negated those before they had more than 1 sale. But just for the purposes of the experiment, we just kind of let them run. And so you can kind of see the performance on each one of these keywords, very, very different, search terms is very, very different. But we would consider all of these successful. So like I said, we went ahead and harvested these and moved them over into our exact campaign. And so you can see in the exact campaign what happened over the same-ish time period of 9 days. And we got, roughly the same performance, a slightly higher ACOS at 23% versus 22%. But again, typically we would be actually adjusting the bid. I just left the bid exactly the same in the exact and the broad at $1.30, just so we could kind of, control a little bit. trying to be a good scientist. And so, yeah, you can see that even without bid adjustment, the ACOS was actually quite comparable. So again, with this, what I just want to show is that you don't necessarily need to be afraid of negating because you'll be sacrificing performance. But I also want to point out that you can see, like we were discussing, even though we had conversions in the broad on 4 of these terms, during these next 9 days, it was only on these 2, right? So it kind of goes back to what I was saying, like how you're not going to get, these might not be amazing, explosive terms for you all across the board, right? You might end up with, just not as great terms. These are much more long tail, as you can see. So you're just going to have lower search volume, and so you're going to have lower activity, basically. But yeah, so that's what I found in my little mini experiment.
Awesome.
I wish you split tested it with like everything being the same, but another one where you didn't negate, and then like in this one you're like, I made 220 before, 220 after. And then the other one, or 220 before, 220 after. And then the other one, maybe you made 220 before. And then if you kept both, you would have aggregated like 320 and then said, or it could have been also still 220. And then you could say, hey, both are like the exact same results. Or, when I kept it off, it was better. Or when I kept it on, it was better.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot you can kind of play around with and do more experiments like this. So for the record, I didn't negate anything in the broad. I just paused it. The main thing that my hypothesis here is that you would still get performance in the exact campaign, and you wouldn't need to wait for that performance either. Like it happened right away once I turned it on, 9 days versus 9 days. But yeah, that would be a really cool experiment to run as well. I mean, we could just see, what happens if you negate versus don't, right? I mean, then we maybe wouldn't need to be here talking about this.
Yeah.
I do clean data.
Yeah, I do think that my key observation from this that I think is this is very helpful. So thanks for sending these, Carly. Is that the search terms seem to get about the same CPC, about the same click volume, about the same conversion rate, whether they're in a broad match or an exact match, and that kind of confirms some suspicions that I had. Which was that Amazon doesn't like give you cheaper CPC discounts on broad match keywords just because you picked a broad match, which is a very prevailing theory that a lot of people cling to. I think Andrew kind of mentioned this earlier. Sometimes you happen to get what seems to be a much lower CPC on a competitive search term, but there's any number of reasons why that could have happened. It could have been a really bad, cheap placement. It could have been a click at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time when all of your competitors were out of budget, and your broad match keyword that only has a 5-cent bid finally won that search term. So a number of reasons there, but I do think that's very interesting that I think it's a good counterpoint to that argument that many people say, which is you can get cheaper CPCs on competitive keywords if you go through a weird match type. I think this is a good case in your good point in your case, Carly.
Yeah, and I also think it illustrates just how harvesting into exact and trying to isolate that spend and everything into an exact match campaign can help you maximize sales. Like you're not going to be able to maximize sales on that grill cleaning brick campaign or that broad match because as you change those bids, it's going to start impacting where you're showing up. So we're seeing here that in the same 9-day period, this grill cleaning brick, 5 sales versus 2 in the broad match campaign. So just an observation for, maximizing sales. In order to be able to do that, we got to be able to be more precise about where we're putting those dollars.
That is not the point we're talking about. We are all in agreement that we need to take keywords from the search term report and launch them in our own campaigns. We're in disagreement that there is a need to negative the original keyword. So no one ever said So
question for you. Sorry. Quick question. When you harvest from like an auto or a broad into exact and you start bidding in your exact campaign, do you notice that the spend on that same search term in the broad campaign actually goes down as you start spending more in your exact campaign?
It stays pretty flat. Go ahead.
Can I jump in there, Mina? Because that actually ties in perfectly to my screenshots, which I'm going to show here, which is, yes. So I've got a screenshot of an account that I've been working with. It's the first screenshot that I sent you guys where it says manual, auto, audiences, contextual. You can see on the manual campaigns, we got about 320 total campaigns. On the auto, 50 campaigns. This is an account I've been managing for years. I've never harvested negated terms. You can naturally see that this is month-to-date performance, by the way, so August 1 through 14, 2 weeks. you can see that basically 90% of the spend and sales are all going to, or I guess 90% of the spend and 80% of the sales are all going to that manual campaign. That's without negating auto. Why is auto spending so much less? Because naturally, as we've been harvesting these into exact match campaigns and everything, I'm pushing the bids as hard as they can go. And yes, with the placements and everything dialed in specifically to each individual keyword, you can go a lot farther and harder compared to just a more shotgun approach with a broad match keyword or an auto campaign. And that second screenshot is then breaking things down by match type, where here you can see there's a little bit more distribution between my auto and or within my manual campaigns. You can see we got some exact phrase broad. Those ones I'm also not negating from like my phrase match. In fact, I'm just kind of I just have like exact match ad groups and then broad and phrase match ad groups. Those could probably be benefited by being split into separate campaigns to take more advantage of like the placement settings and everything. But for the time being, they're all kind of sharing one campaign. You can see with exact, that ACoS is quite a bit higher, but that's because, we got some ranking campaigns in there. So we're intentionally trying to push a bit harder on those exact match keywords. And so they still end up rising to the top naturally as we're doing everything to get as many sales as possible. Naturally, the exact match is a bit more efficient, so we can naturally spend more there to get those sales. So I don't think you really need to try to reduce the amount of spend on all those other placements. For me, naturally, things will go there if you're bidding properly. And then lastly, it is just more consistent with your research-based campaigns. You don't have to sweat about what's going to happen to your bidding calculations if you just negated everything that was driving to sales. So that's actually my concluding thought. And yeah, I think from here we can go around and have everyone else share their concluding thoughts.
Let's do it. Carly, what you got?
All right, so I'm still convinced that you need to negate. Personally, I do think that you're going to get more efficient campaigns across the board. But I do think an important point that we kind of came across today is that you still need to very much be optimizing in your source or discovery campaigns, and you don't necessarily want to just let those run forever. Then you are going to run into issues. But yeah, still on the negation side.
I'm still on the anti-negation side. Obviously, I just Carly's experiment was very interesting, and I want to test out kind of what we talked about is like, what if because that would be really nice, because then we can have actually an even better conversation about like, what if I did two campaigns very similar, one with negation, one without negation? What is the outcome? Do I see more sales when I do negate, or do I see it in terms of aggregated, right? I don't have an issue like Andrew does of like pivoting. We have automated analytics, so it does all of the work for us. So for me, I'm like, I just want the most amount of money and the most amount of profit. But yeah, I mean, this was kind of eye-opening to see like there was a test where you paused it and nothing really happened. Like you still were able to match the performance. So at least at a base level, there is a scenario where you don't lose the performance. I've just been burned a lot and I've lost performance a lot. So that's kind of why I've been like, hey, if it's not going to hurt me, I'm just not going to mess with it. But it's good to see. I mean, also Amazon's always changing, so you never know how things are changing in the back end.
All right. And negating source because it shouldn't really matter. Your bidding should actually cover most of that. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. It shouldn't really matter. Take this as a good informational. You probably learned something about each side of the argument here. And Steven, why don't you send us out?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's opinions were changed today, but maybe we changed the opinions of some of our listeners, and they would love to reach out to you guys to thank you. So what's the best place for them to get in touch? Carly, let's start with you. If people want to ask you questions, where do they go?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, I'm just Carly McMillan, or you can find the agency at ppcfarm.com.
If you guys want to learn more about, stuff like Amazon PPC stuff, go to my YouTube channel, Mina Elias, MINAELIAS, and then LinkedIn, Mina Elias, and Instagram at the Mina Elias. The website's triviumco.com. I'm happy to answer any questions and talk about negation and stuff.
Awesome. We'll have all those links and resources in the description of this podcast. You guys can click on those. Everyone should drop a comment letting us know your thoughts. Where do you land? Which arguments did you like? Which ones do you disagree with? Let's have now a debate going on in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week on That Amazon Ads podcast.